question kind of comes up a lot about what service people should use to measure a roof, what services people do use. A lot of times it boils down to preference. There are actually dozens of different services out there. These just happen to be kind of the three most common. Now, EagleView is a satellite measuring service. They take an image of the roof from satellite. I mean, that basically sums it up. They try to measure it that way. Now, with EagleView, they rely on having multiple layers of images usually. So if a satellite's only passed by your house once, there's going to be a little bit more inaccuracy to it. It's unlikely to get the slope of it. It's just going to be a 2D EagleView, even if there's a Google Streets. As opposed to Roofr, which is another satellite service, which can usually get a lot better results off of one or two image. Now, the EagleView is generally accurate. I would say that probably 80% of the EagleView measurements I get are accurate enough that I can work with. Like any service, unfortunately, if I have a very large building, if I have something above 20 squares, there's going to be some inaccuracies. Usually only by a couple inches here and there. I have seen EagleView miss entire slopes of the roof. I have seen EagleView mislabel the direction of a slope. I have seen EagleView put on a slope where they've said it was a 512 when it was a 2. I've also seen them say it was a 512 when it was a 10. And I see this problem with EagleView more than other services. Now, I will say the biggest headache that you get with EagleView is, say you put in an address, 1234 Made Up Lane, and you go there and it doesn't match the diagram at all. You find out, well, it's actually 1256, or it's 1211, or my personal favorite, it's 3 roads down. I've had plenty of times where I've seen a report where I can verify that I turned in for 1234 lane, but they gave me 1234 road or circle or avenue or so on and so forth. Sometimes I will get an EagleView report back where I will get a report that is blank. There's no diagram whatsoever attached to it. I've had plenty of EagleViews like this. Generally, I would say if in the last 3 years I've probably looked over probably between 1,400 and 1,800 EagleViews. I'd say this is about 10% of the time that I see EagleView do a major mishap, where it's either wrong address, correct address, but they grabbed a neighbor's house by accident. Another favorite of mine is, say there's a shed in back. They'll measure the shed, but not the house. Even on these properties where you see these 40-acre plus properties, they will send in the shed measurements, but they won't send in the house, which is the only thing that connects to the road. And plenty of times, the vast majority of times nowadays, you can use Google Streets to verify an address, or just simply Google it and it pops up on Redfin or another real estate website. It is incredibly easy nowadays to verify which house is which, and yet EagleView, rather than getting better as the technology has gotten better, EagleView, if anything, has gotten a little worse. I think it's because of the amount of volume they're getting. They're not investing as much time and effort into it. That's my personal opinion. The rest of this is a little bit more fact-oriented. EagleView is usually accurate. So if I were to put in measurements, I would say that 80% of reports are probably within 98% of the measurement. Meaning that if I have a 100-foot stretch of eave on one section, I'm probably going to get a measurement that's between 99 feet 6 inches and 100 feet 6 inches. And it's going to be accurate enough to order most residential materials. Now, you don't want that level of accuracy when it comes to slate. You don't want that level of accuracy when it comes to real copper. And you don't want that level of accuracy when it comes to some of your higher-end commercial roofs. But especially if you're custom ordering a commercial roof, like if you're using a service, I'm not going to say the company because I don't want to promote them, but there is a company out there that makes custom roofs that are pre-manufactured so that you take them out, roll them out, and they're the exact shape of the roof. You never want to use EagleView for this service because they are almost always off by a couple inches, and if you're doing something that is precise, you cannot be that much off. Now moving over to Roofr, R-O-O-F-R. And so these are also mostly satellite based. I will say with EagleView, one of the headaches of the report not coming back ever, sorry, camera tried to tip there, I have the headache of the report not coming back ever, saying, oh, we can't get a good view of it, and I can see it on satellite, but it's only one image. Or the reason the slopes are inaccurate is because there's only been one satellite passing over. There's no 3D optimization to it whatsoever. You go on Google Earth, and it's the most grainy image you've ever seen since, 5 years ago when they were all grainy. And I will say I have much more accuracy in those cases with Roofr. If going back to that 100-foot eave example, if I had a 100-foot eave, I will say with Roofr, the odds of it being off are higher. The odds of me getting a 97-foot or 103-foot somewhere, it's a much wider range of inaccuracy, so I definitely would never trust it on those materials. The bright side, which is also a major downside to Roofr, is that they allow you to adjust those measurements so that it can generate a new report and you have much more accurate breakdowns of stuff like where's your drip edge, how much coping, stuff like that. The problem is that now you have a third-party measurement verification that you can edit at will. Once you have that, taking those reports to arbitration, showing them to adjusters, if you have a court, for any reason you're in court, these reports become less and less relied upon, and in some cases won't even be taken into consideration. I do like their service because it's editable, so I can go out there, verify it in person. Over the last 3 years, I've probably less than 200 times seen a Roofr report. They are getting more popular with each passing year, and the majority of times that I see someone order it is when EagleView failed in the ways mentioned before, or there are a few roofing companies that have been burned by EagleView so many times that they've moved over to third parties. And that's truly, like, every time somebody brings one of these reports forward, it's almost always one of those two things. EagleView failed them, or EagleView failed them one too many times and they dropped EagleView altogether. You almost never hear anybody start there. It is a relatively new service in comparison and relatively unknown in comparison, especially when almost every insurance carrier uses a alternative measuring service. I've never heard of an insurance carrier that relied on Roofr. Now, I've seen a few that have accepted a report from them that was sent to a contractor, but I've never seen one that ordered one themselves. I may be wrong on that. I probably am. There are probably some that do, but it's insanely unheard of at this point. With them, as far as accuracy, I would say I probably get back 90 to 95% of reports. I very rarely see them get the wrong house. I don't see them leave out outbuildings as often as I do with EagleView, or to use outbuildings instead of the main building because the main building's too complicated. Which, if you ask me, I think it's just EagleView being lazy. I do see a lot less accuracy, though. So it's with them, I always want to verify the measurements. Now, the third service is Hover. Now, unlike the first two that rely solely on satellite imagery and sometimes stuff like the street imagery, Hover, on the other hand, is an app you can install on your phone, or you can send them photos through their website. And you go around the property and you film the property from all angles. Well, photograph it from all angles, not film it. Unless you're using the Hover embodied program. And it photographs from all sides of this property, and it builds a 3D model that includes the roof, and you can also get it to include the outside of the house. And so benefits to this is that if you live in an area where you have a lot of trees that hang overhead, that those trees make it impossible for satellite services sometimes. A lot of times you have a color of roof that makes the little nuances hard to see, like when you have a sudden transition in slope. It comes with a lot more accuracy towards that slope. I will say that I would say probably 85 to 90% of all Hover reports I get are accurate. And when I have an issue with Hover, though, is I have had reports come back that were just so wildly inaccurate. Like, the example I like to give is I was working on a 14-foot by 60-foot little modular, and we were required to use Hover for that project due to the customer that had hired us. And when the Hover came back, it said that this was over 1,200 squares. 120,000 square feet. 14 by 60 was the measurement. And I have had that with Hover now and again. That said, over the last 3 years, probably over 1,000 Hover reports. I doubt 10% of them have been inaccurate like that. In fact, I highly doubt even 5% of them. 5% is probably the cutoff, is what I'd say, of when Hover just absolutely sends out the wrong measurement. Hover doesn't work as well on flat roofs. And I have seen instances as well where people have only photographed 3 or 4 sides of a house, and it's gotten really accurate on sides that it had no way of seeing. So I do think that they do supplement that with outside sources, but the primary source is going to be your photography. But Hover has always been a failure, in my opinion, when it comes to any slope that's below a 212. Now it's great if you've just got, oh hey, this is a building, I'm trying to figure out the outside wall measurements. That's great. It gets the perimeter really well. But when you're on one of these like strip malls where you suddenly have a 6-inch or 12-inch tall parapet wall separating sections, it's going to miss those sections a lot. I will say that Hover doesn't work well if you have a lot of obstructions outside the house. So if you have trees everywhere that are close to the house. Now, it's not about whether the tree overhangs the roof like with EagleView. It's about whether the tree obstructs the front view. So Hover works better when you have those really tall 100-year-old trees. And those are areas where, especially if you live in the middle of Colorado, let's face it, we have little miniature forests everywhere that have been around for longer than the houses were, and the houses were just kind of built around them. Or you have properties that were built 100 years ago, like the old north end of Colorado Springs, and you get these trees that are 3 times taller than the house. Well, those trees branch outward. That'll obstruct the roof from an EagleView. It will not affect the Hover whatsoever. Where Hover tends to fail is when you have these new neighborhoods that were built 10, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, where the trees are only, maybe 10, 20 feet off the ground. And so all those branches, as they're starting to spread out, are starting to touch the edges of the house. And so in the wintertime, that's going to be okay. But in the summertime, you're not going to be able to get an accurate Hover if every corner is obstructed by trees. And let's face it, it happens out here. It happens a lot. It happens so much that the majority of jurisdictions here have passed laws about those trees that nobody listens to or enforces. It's unless they hate you. I mean, I'll be honest. The only time I've ever seen some of these ordinances when it came to trees enforced is if they were genuinely out to get the homeowner, like they were trying to punish him for something he did, or the guy pissed off the wrong person in the building department. And it shouldn't be legal, but I mean, it's the government. What can you do? That aside, Hover has given us an opportunity for new construction that we don't have with any of the satellite services. If you've got a house that was built in the last year, even in the last 3 years, there's a good chance that the EagleView will fail, or it will come up with inaccurate information, or what information it will have will be extremely limited. It won't be able to measure the slope. Like I said with EagleView, I see all the time where you see slopes misidentified. They're either steeper or less steep. Hover is usually pretty great at getting that slope within about 1/12. Now, where this is horrible is Hover rounds up. So if you've got a 312 roof, you know that with 312, you have to take extra steps. If you've got a 212 roof, you know that you're going to have to switch it over to flat, some form of commercial roofing. And you will see Hover constantly round up. So that 312, that 3/4 12, is now 412. So you no longer have to use the additional steps. That 1.5 12 that you absolutely have to get a flat roof system on is now a 212. And so because it's a perfect 212, you might be able to work around it, say, hey, this is a 2.25, and then get it to pass. The same problem exists with EagleView, but with much worse. And with Roofr, but again, much worse. I will say Hover is better in that way, but Hover constantly, I would say probably 95% of reports I get, the slope is rounded up higher than it should be, which is great if If you're working with an insurance company where they are going to pay you more at an 812 or a 1012, that's great if you've got a 712 and they use Hover or you use Hover and suddenly it's an 8. That's not really honest, but it's the state of the roofing industry. It's absolutely horrible if it's a 1.5 12 and suddenly it says 3 or even 2, because now you're obligated to prove what everybody already knew that's been on site. So those are the 3 main services. That's just kind of, most of this is my opinion, but I've, grand total between the 3 of them, I've looked at over 2,000 reports the last 3 years. I've gotten a really good feel for how some of these work. Overall, EagleView is great. It's admissible in court. It simplifies for a shingle roof. Now, I would trust EagleView over Hover on a flat roof, but if I'm being honest, I wouldn't trust either of them. I do always prefer to verify the measurements, especially what I would do with EagleView every time is you're going to have to double check that all the slopes are there, that they're accurate. EagleView constantly misidentifies what direction a slope runs, what slope it is, so you're always going to want to grab a pitch gauge and a tape measure. With Hover, if you can verify the length and width, you'll know that the accuracy of all the components in between is probably going to be about 99% of the time accurate. With EagleView, you might have to do all kinds of measurements to make sure it's accurate. And if that slope's off, by the way, your measurement's going to be way off. So the difference between a 512 and a 712, that's a good percentage of your roof. That's your waste factor right there doubled just by having that wrong slope in there. And so that's why EagleView always verify that slope. With Roofr, the measurements are wildly inaccurate sometimes, and Hover is absolutely garbage when it comes to flat roofs that are complicated. Again, great if you don't have a bunch of parapet walls, expansion joints, stuff like that. But if you're looking at a commercial building like a split mall, a manufacturing plant, anything like that, Hover is one of the worst I've ever used. And actually, I will say EagleView is actually pretty great at this, at those long buildings, and you just take a couple tape measures, verify a few spots, and you're fine.